Today, I'm at the Civil War battlefield of Chickamauga, and I'm here to learn about World War I. Learn more about that fascinating connection coming up next.
Nothing but Germans over on that side. Right on the other side of here would have been another wall going up.
Okay.
So it only would have been about this wide.
Wow.
And the reason it's so narrow is because they had artillery barrages that were just amazingly intense. And the narrower the trench, the less likelihood of one of those ending up down here where people wouldn't like it.
Sure.
So
Neat.
you kept the trenches narrow. You use the corrugated iron to help prop it up because northern France got a lot of rain.
Okay.
And when rain hits dirt, it becomes mud, and mud doesn't like to stand up. So, you have supports on the trench walls. You have firing steps. That's what these are actually, not benches for sitting on. But, these firing ports normally would have been covered up because the Germans had a very active and well-trained sniper corps.
Probably very accurate, too.
Well, they started the war with the only units that were designated as snipers.
Okay.
None of the other countries had snipers.
Interesting.
So, when the trench warfare evolved, the Germans already had 1,500 trained snipers on the front lines with, special rifles and scopes and set up to do this thing. So they had a huge advantage, and anybody who popped their head off, they'd get it.
Yeah.
So, very quickly they learned that you don't pop your head up. Well, if you want to see what's going on the other side, instead, you grab your handy-dandy trench periscope.
Okay, cool.
Because, it's just two mirrors in a box.
Yeah.
And you can pop that up and you can see what's going on if you hear something.
Very
without
nice.
having to put yourself in danger. Now, in the event that you do see a horde of Germans charging across no man's land towards you, then what you do is you pop out your covers here and you can start shooting. We've got two automatic weapons here. We've got a Lewis light machine gun over here. This weapon they actually used to train with in the United States. When they got to France, they didn't take these with them. We have a picture over here, if you look down on there. Those are soldiers here at Camp Greenleaf training with the Lewis light machine gun.
So why would they train with a gun that they don't use in battle?
Here we go. Good question. It all boils down to something called logistics. And that was that when we got over to France, we didn't have enough machine guns. We had very few in the U.S. Army.
Okay.
So what we were dependent on is Americans were given either French or British machine guns, depending on which group that they were kind of under.
We were basically the latecomers to the war, right?
Very much so.
Okay.
Everybody else has been fighting this for 3.5 years by the time we got into it. 1914, to 1917, and the first troops are getting to France, kind of August, September, time frame of 1917.
Okay.
So very much late to the game.
Yeah.
And so the other aspect of it is that when we enter the war, the French and the British sent advisors and trainers over to the United States to teach us how to fight trench warfare.
Okay.
And one of the other interesting things about this photograph is in the back, kneeling behind this line of American soldiers, you see a fellow and he's got a strange cap and he's got a badge on it. And the badge has a maple leaf on it. And he's a Canadian trainer training U.S. troops. Because, of course, in the First World War, Canadians were right there with the British.
Okay.
So, these guys have been fighting for 3 years. They knew everything there was to know pretty much about, the Lewis gun. They've been using that for the whole war. We thought, we'll probably end up using it too, so we'll train with it.
Yeah. And
in any instance, the techniques of utilization of a light machine gun are the same regardless of what the weapon is you're given. So there was a lot to learn. The other weapon we've got here that's a French Chauchat automatic rifle.
Okay.
And it is fully automatic. This was the most used automatic weapon in World War I. They made 500,000 of them.
Wow.
And the French issued it in 1915. It got a bad reputation for two reasons. One of which was that when the American troops got to France, Pershing says, yes, this is a good weapon. We want it issued to American troops. But instead of an 8mm Lebel, which is the French standard caliber, we want them in 30-06, which is the American standard caliber. So the French are busy making these things by the thousands, and they're thinking to themselves, you know, yeah, we can do that, big deal. Well, they botched the job, and the ones that are issued to the Americans just don't fire reliably at all.
Okay.
And nobody's got the time to you know, figure out to debug it, basically.
Yeah.
So they all get scrapped. So instead, American troops are actually issued the ones in 8mm Lebel because they know it works. Now that creates that same logistical problem because American troops are carrying 30-06 ammunition for their rifles, and they're having to carry 8mm Lebel ammunition for these things. So, you know, you win some, you lose some.
Typical government.
Well, not typical, but you know, it happens. So the other reason these got a bad reputation was that when Americans brought those back to the United States, in World War I, you could bring any souvenir you could actually bring back with you. There were no laws against this.
Okay.
And in many cases, the average American soldier brought home 50 pounds of souvenirs from World War I. And a lot of them were shipped home as opposed to being brought back in duffel bags and stuff.
Okay.
Because, you know, all you had to do was, you know, okay, you've got 30 days, you know, in the rear lines, because they rotated units in and out of the front lines. You didn't live in the trenches, you know, for 6 months. So, you know, it's your turn to rotate to the back, pick up your bag of souvenirs, you go back there, you find a post office, oh, there's a box, okay. Write an address on it, and off it goes. So, you know, a lot of this stuff, you know, foreign stuff was brought back from World War I as souvenirs. So Americans like to play with guns. It's just a fact of life. So they start shooting these things, but the only ammunition available is French. And French ammunition is low quality. And automatic weapons like to have very consistent ammunition because it's a mechanical device. It depends upon a specific recoil impulse, you know, powder charge and all this kind of stuff. So when you've got inconsistencies, they don't work very reliably. And as time passes, that French ammunition gets older and deteriorates and becomes even less reliable. So that's two reasons this gun has a bad reputation. It does have some flaws. It was 1915 after all. Automatic weapons were a new technology. And biggest flaw is it's got cutouts in the side of the magazine. And the reason for that was that your Shoshat team had two people. You had a gunner, the guy that's actually shooting it, and you had a loader, and he's standing next to the guy on the right side. And if he's looking at that gun, he can see how many rounds are left in that magazine. So when that magazine gets empty, he pops it out and slams another one in there. You know, but, okay, you got big holes in the magazine, you're crawling through the mud and the hook and all that kind of stuff. And
Mud's going to get in.
Right. There are also some other large holes in the mechanism of the gun, you know, that are there for good reasons. You have to eject shells and you have to do other things. And those all accumulated mud as well. The French are very practical. They said, we've got a gun that works, so we don't want to screw around with it. So what we're going to do is we're going to issue a canvas cover with every gun. And it was a canvas cover that covered the whole gun. And it had 2 snaps, so if, you know, people started shooting at you, you just slide your hand down it, and unsnap, you pull your gun out, and you shoot. Very fast, very efficient. A lot of the pictures you see of French soldiers in World War I, you'll see 15, 20 guys out there, and a bunch of them have got their rifles in front of them, and they're standing like that, and then you see 2 or 3 guys, and they've got the canvas bag over their shoulder, and you're going, what's up with that? Shoshat gunners.
Interesting.
How many rounds did that?
That magazine holds 20 rounds. Yeah. It did have a problem with overheating. You know, in order to make the gun as light as possible, it's got a lot of movement inside of that gun, a lot of parts that have to move back and forth. And when that barrel heats up, you know, when metal gets hot, it expands. So, you know, if you fire too many rounds too quickly, that metal, those metal pieces would expand and they'd seize up against the receiver. And you had to kind of either wait for it to cool off or cool it down somehow or another. You know, a lot of times French soldiers would take their canteen. They had 2 canteens, did you know that? One had water, the other had wine. But so they'd take their canteen that had water in it, very important distinction, and cool down and pour it on the gun to cool it down. Or, you know, there were other field expedient methods we don't have to go into right here. The other thing is if you could find a shell hole that had water in it that was less muddy than the rest of the gun was, you know, then you could scoop some of the cleaner water over the gun to cool it down. That gun, I have some magazines that work with it and some that don't. The ones that do work well with it, 2 weekends ago I put 200 rounds through the gun without a stoppage. It's a good gun. It's not the best thing ever invented. There's no doubt about that. But in 1915, there was nothing else. If you're talking
an automatic 1915 was pretty good.
Yeah, it was. There were a lot of automatic guns in 1915, believe it or not, and most of them were pretty bad because it was new technology. People were trying out different things. They were trying to do things in different ways and see what worked and what didn't, and a lot of it didn't. But in 1915, 16, and 17, when the Germans captured Shoshat's or Lewis guns, they used them because they had nothing else that was even comparable. The lightest machine gun that the Germans had, they took their standard MG08 Maxim gun, which is a big heavy beast on a huge mount, and the whole get-up weighs about 120 pounds. They're not designed to be moved around a lot. But they redesigned the Maxim gun and, shrunk parts and did stuff and did away with the mount and put it on a bipod. And they made a drum magazine that held the belt. And they figured, okay, now we got a light machine gun. Well, their light machine gun was 50 pounds. And another thing is that the belts that they used in those days, nowadays it's all disintegrating metal links, which means that when you fire a cartridge, the link is left behind and just that one link gets kicked out of the gun. Back then they used cloth belts, and however long the belt was however long the cloth was, and it stayed that way. So you can imagine here you've got your poor German MG08 15 gunner, and he's trying to charge at the British or American trenches with this 50-pound gun, and he's got this huge drum magazine hanging out the side of it. And then he's got this cloth belt which starts coming out the side of the gun. The more he fires it, the longer it gets. And it was a 250 round belt, which was 12 feet when it was fully loaded. So the Germans kept trying to come up with ideas of, how do we keep the gunners from tripping over this darn cloth belt? And they never did, which is why if they could capture Allied light automatics, they used them until they ran out of ammunition. At one point, and the Battle of the Somme, the British, it was a huge disaster for both sides, actually. But large numbers of British Lewis guns were captured. They captured like 600 of them. And so, since they had nothing comparable, the Germans converted those to 8mm Mauser, which was their standard cartridge. I know of about 4 8mm Mauser Lewis guns that are still in existence, and they're all in Europe. There are none in the U.S. And if you ever run across a drum for a Lewis gun, and it's got on the bottom of it, it'll say either 30 U.S., which is 30-06, like this gun, or it'll say Mark 3, 5, or 7, MK and Roman numerals after it. Well, those are the British guns. They don't necessarily have the caliber on them. But if you find one that has the British designation on the bottom of it, and it's all been scratched out, and then somewhere on there it'll have engraved in there 8mm. If you find one of those drums, it's worth about $5,000, just the drum. So, I don't think you're going to find one. I mean, I've only ever seen one for sale, and that's what it went for. But, so anyway, the trench warfare was very interesting. The Germans, since they had invaded half of northern France, they said, we're here to stay, we're not giving this up. So their trenches were designed for permanency. They had concrete, trench walls, trench bottoms, they had drainage systems, they had, concrete bunkers set up. They were there to stay. That was very permanent. They were not going to leave. The Allied trenches were more like this. They were temporary constructions, and the idea was that, we've lost half of northern France. We want it back. So we don't want to stay here. We want to go there. And, if you build a permanent installation, it gets into the mindset, okay, we're here to stay. We're content. And they didn't want the troops to get into that mindset. They wanted them in the mindset of, we want to go, get the rest of France back, as they eventually did. one of the other things that's interesting here is you don't see anybody here right now wearing a gas mask. In World War I, anybody within about 10 miles of the front lines was going to wear a gas mask. And no ifs, ands, and buts about it. There was one battalion of the 30th Infantry, U.S. Infantry Division. In a 30-day period, they had 75 gas attacks. And we're not talking tear gas here. We're talking incapacitating and lethal gases. These gas masks that were issued were based on a British design. This one is an original and it's very fragile, so I'm going to be careful. I'm not actually going to bring it out. Plastic bag is not original to World War I.
Now they actually wore the mask, or they just had to have the mask with them?
No, they hadn't had it with them at all times. But of course, naturally, if you're under a gas attack, you're actually going to wear it. And what you've got in here is you've got a mask on one side that's stuffed in there. And then you've got a hose that leads to a metal canister. Well, the metal canister has got the filter element in it. And underneath the metal canister is a spring to keep it off the bottom of the bag and create a little air compartment. And then the bag is just standard canvas. Air can flow through it. So when you're wearing the mask, you've got this hose, and this would be worn on the chest, right about here. So you've got this hose going into this canister, and then your air would go into the bag and then through the bottom of the canister and through the filter and then up through the hose and into your mouth. And that's an important distinction because the mask actually had a little clamp for your nose. So you couldn't accidentally breathe in through your nose and get unfiltered air.
Now, did they filter pretty good?
They did pretty well, but any chemical filter has a limited lifespan.
That's what I started to say.
Yeah, so if you're under a continuous gas attack, those filters are good for 4 to 6 hours, depending on what kind of gas you're getting attacked with. So they had procedures of how do you change canisters. It was a huge thing. Other thing, one of the things we found out in our investigation is that there are 3 ways of wearing your gas mask. If you're in the rear echelons and you're not expecting any kind of a gas attack, but you got to carry the thing with you, you wore it across your your chest at your side. And you see a lot of pictures of American troops like that. And the reason is because photographers didn't often go to the front lines because it was dangerous. Same thing today. You don't, we get some media folks that go up there and get embedded. Back then they didn't. Photographers did things at their own risk. And if they wanted to go to the front lines, they could, but it was going to be, you're an idiot, and you're taking your life in your hands. Okay, so when you start getting up to the front lines, it was mandated that you wore the sucker on your chest. Now, there are 2 ways of wearing it on your chest. You can wear it with the snaps out, or you can wear it with the snaps in. Now, why would you wear it with the snaps in towards your chest like this?
Easier to get out?
It's actually a little bit harder to get out, but your combat troops would wear it with the snaps against your chest. Your rear echelon troops would wear it with the snaps out.
In case you fell down on the ground, you just crawl and keep.
Bingo! Keep mud from getting in there, because like this, you can see this flap might open up, and you might get mud down in there, and if the canister gets wet, the filtering capacity disappears pretty much. So you want to keep the canister dry. So your combat troops, you see pictures. If you see troops with it like this, you know that okay, these are frontline soldiers. These are guys actually fighting with it. If you see troops with it like this, those are rear echelon folks. Who cares?
Well, that's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, we've never experienced any type of chemical warfare like we used in World War I. And World War I is the primary reason we haven't experienced it, because everybody pretty much agreed that this was so horrific that anybody who did it in the future, was automatically designated the bad guys.